The grand chamber of Aethys Prime had not been this loud in 400 years. 46 species screamed at each other across the curved rows of the enormous hall, their voices rising and crashing like waves against rock. Some spoke through translators. Some roared in languages that needed no translation. Fear sounded the same in every tongue. Speaker Voleth stood at the center podium, his 4 thin arms raised for silence that would not come. He was old, even by the standards of his insectoid kind, and his dark shell had gone pale with age. He had led the Galactic Council through border disputes, trade wars, and a dozen minor conflicts. But this was not minor. This was the end of everything he knew. The Vethrak Dominion had declared total war. It had started small, as these things always did, a border colony, a disputed mining system. Then the Vethrak burned an entire world, and broadcast the footage to every species in the galaxy as a warning. Surrender or die. Those were the only 2 choices the Vethrak had ever offered anyone. And in 12,000 years of conquest, no one had found a third. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The Council's combined navy was outmatched 3-1, and that gap was growing every day. Colony after colony had already gone dark. Whole civilizations were being swallowed. The reports came in faster than Voleth could read them, each one worse than the last. "We must consolidate our remaining forces," Warden Quillos said from the military balcony above. The avian commander's feathers were ruffled with stress, and his sharp eyes moved across the chamber like a hawk, scanning for threats. "Pull back to the inner systems. Sacrifice the outer territories to buy time." "Buy time for what?" Ambassador Dren asked for this seat in the 3rd row. The reptilian diplomat's voice was low and dry, cutting through the noise like a blade. "We have been buying time for 6 months. What are we purchasing with it? A slower death." The chamber erupted again. Accusations flew. 3 ambassadors walked out. One species threatened to surrender to the Vethrak independently. Another demanded that the Council use a weapon that had been banned for 1,000 years. Voleth closed his eyes and felt the weight of a galaxy pressing down on his old shoulders. Then a hand rose in the back of the chamber. It was a small hand, attached to a small woman, sitting in a seat so far from the center of power that most delegates had forgotten it existed. Earth's seat, the cheap one, near the exit, assigned to a species that had only been part of the galactic community for 19 years. "The chair recognizes the representative from Earth," Voleth said, mostly because he was desperate for anyone to change the subject. Shin Yuri stood up. She was not tall, she was not loud. She wore a simple dark suit, and her black hair was pulled back in a neat knot. She looked like someone who might work in an office somewhere, sorting files and drinking tea. She did not look like someone who was about to change the course of galactic history. "Thank you, Speaker," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, and she spoke the common galactic language with a slight accent that made her consonants sharper than they needed to be. "Earth has been listening to this debate for 3 hours. We understand the situation. The Vethrak are strong, and the Council is afraid. That is not a criticism. Fear is reasonable when something is trying to kill you." She paused. The chamber was quiet now, mostly out of curiosity. The small planet was speaking. How amusing. "Earth would like to offer its military forces to the war effort," Yuri said. "All of them." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then the laughter started. It came from everywhere. The tall, elegant beings from the inner worlds. The heavy, stone-skinned miners from the outer rim. Even Warden Quillos let out a sharp chirp that passed for humor among his kind. Earth. The tiny blue world with one sun, no colonies, and a fleet of maybe 140 ships. Earth wanted to fight the Vethrak Dominion. Yuri did not react to the laughter. She stood perfectly still and waited for it to die. And something about the way she waited made it die faster than it should have. "We are aware that our fleet is small by galactic standards," she continued. We are aware that many of you see Earth as a minor world of no real importance. That is fine. We are not asking for your respect. We are not asking for your ships or your resources. We are asking only to be pointed in the right direction." She smiled. It was a polite smile. It was the kind of smile that did not reach the eyes. Ambassador Dren was not laughing. He had not laughed at all. While the other delegates had been busy with their politics and their panic, Dren had spent the last 3 years quietly reading Earth's uncensored history files. He had read about the trenches of their first Great War, where millions died for a few miles of mud. He had read about their Second Great War, where they split the atom and used it to burn 2 cities off the map. He had read about the Cold War that followed, where 2 nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to end all life on their planet, and then sat like that for 40 years, fingers on the button, waiting. He had read about what humans did to each other. The thought of what they might do to someone else kept him awake at night. Dren leaned toward Speaker Valet's podium and spoke in a whisper that his translator barely caught. "Let them fight, and then, old friend, pray they stop when it is over." The vote was 44-2 in favor of allowing Earth to participate. The Council assigned humanity to the Palax Front, a dead sector of burned worlds and broken fleets, already considered lost. They expected humans to die there quietly, buying perhaps a few weeks of time. A noble sacrifice from a minor species. 12 hours later, aboard the flagship Chungmu, Admiral Kang Do-hyun sat in his command chair and read the Palax Front tactical data on a wide screen. The numbers were bad. 2,000 enemy ships against his 140. 3 occupied worlds. 12 billion civilians trapped under Vethrak control. The Council had sent him to a graveyard. Do-hyun leaned back and smiled. It was the same kind of smile Yuri had worn in the chamber, the kind that did not reach the eyes. He turned to the woman standing beside him. Yoon Hana, his chief weapons scientist, was already running numbers on her tablet, her fingers moving fast. "They gave us the whole buffet," Do-hyun said. Hana did not look up. "I already have the menu planned." The Palax sector was a graveyard before the humans arrived. 3 star systems, each one a ruin. Broken council ships drifted in clouds of frozen debris, their hulls torn open like paper. Distress signals still beeped from wreckage that no one was coming to save. On the 3 occupied worlds below, 12 billion civilians lived under Vethrak boots, waiting for a rescue that the galaxy had already decided was not coming. Warden Quillos had pulled the Council fleet out of Palax 2 weeks earlier. He called it a strategic retreat. Everyone else called it what it was. He ran. The Vethrak now held the sector with over 2,000 warships and a ground occupation force that numbered in the millions. They were dug in, supplied, and confident. No force in galactic history had ever retaken a sector from the Vethrak once they had settled into it. When the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Palax sector, the Council observers on board prepared themselves for what they believed would be a short and tragic story. Archivist Penu, an amphibian historian with large wet eyes and soft gray skin, had been assigned to document the human campaign. He expected to write an obituary. He set up his recording equipment in a small cabin aboard the Chungmu and began his notes with the words, "The humans arrived with courage and little else." He would cross that line out later. Admiral Kang Do-hyun did not do what everyone expected. He did not charge the Vethrak main fleet. He did not form a defensive line. He did not send a brave, doomed message to the enemy commander. Instead, he sat in his command chair, studied the tactical map for 6 hours, drank 4 cups of black coffee, and then gave an order that made Archivist Penu's translator glitch, because it could not find a galactic equivalent. Hit the supply lines. No Council species had ever targeted Vethrak supply lines. It was considered pointless, because the Vethrak always had more supplies than anyone else. Their logistics network was enormous, a river of fuel and ammunition and food that flowed from deep inside Dominion space to every front. Attacking it was like trying to stop a river by throwing stones. Do-hyun did not throw stones. He sent Captain Baek Ji-ho. Ji-ho was 31 years old, loud, reckless, and loved by every single person who served under him. He commanded a pack of 12 destroyers, fast and mean ships that the crew had nicknamed the Wolves. Ji-ho took his wolves into the asteroid belt between the second and third systems of the Palak sector, and waited like a predator in tall grass. When the first Vethrak supply convoy came through, fat and slow and barely guarded, Ji-ho hit it at a speed that the Council considered suicidal. His destroyers shot through the convoy at close range, guns blazing, tearing apart fuel tankers and ammunition transports before the Vethrak escorts could even turn around. By the time the enemy reacted, Ji-ho and his wolves were already gone, vanished back into the asteroid field like ghosts. He did it again the next day, and the next, and the next. Within 48 hours, the Vethrak fleet at Palax was running low on fuel. Their commanders were confused and angry. They sent hunter groups into the asteroid belt to find the human destroyers. Ji-ho ambushed every single one of them. While the Vethrak chased shadows in the asteroids, Admiral Do-hyun made his second move. He brought the main fleet in close and targeted the Vethrak capital ships directly. And this was when the galaxy learned about Yoon Hana. Hana had spent 7 years developing a weapon she called the Pulse Collapse Warhead. The science behind it was complicated, but the result was simple. When the warhead hit a Vethrak capital ship, it destabilized the energy core inside. The core, which normally powered the entire vessel, turned against itself. The ship did not explode outward. It collapsed inward, crushing itself into a ball of twisted metal no bigger than a house. The first Vethrak battleship to die this way simply disappeared from the tactical map. One moment it was there, a massive red dot representing a ship 2 kilometers long. The next moment, it was gone. The Vethrak did not understand what had happened. Neither did the Council observers. Archivist Penu watched the recordings 17 times. On the 18th viewing, his translator finally managed to express what he was feeling. It came out as a single word: impossible. Hana fired 12 more pulse collapse warheads that day. 12 more capital ships ceased to exist. The Vethrak fleet, suddenly starving and losing their biggest ships to a weapon they could not see or understand, began to panic. For the first time in 12,000 years, Vethrak commanders sent messages to each other that contained a word their language had almost forgotten: retreat. Admiral Do-hyun sent them one message. It was short: withdraw from this sector and release the civilian populations, or we will board your ships and take them. The Vethrak did not withdraw. They had never retreated in their entire history as a species. Their pride would not allow it, even when their logic screamed at them to run. So Do-hyun sent in Commander No Tae-soon. He was 44 years old, quiet in the way that heavy things are quiet, and he had been training soldiers for 20 years. He commanded Earth's Marine Shock Units, 12,000 men and women whose entire purpose was to board enemy ships and take them by force. The boarding pods launched from the human fleet like a swarm of metal seeds. They punched through the hull of the Vethrak flagship, a monstrous vessel called Gorath's Maw, and spilled human marines into its corridors. The Vethrak were enormous. They stood 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plates, with claws that could tear through steel. They were born to kill. They had evolved on a death world where everything was a predator, and they had become the greatest predators of all. The humans did not care. Tae-soon's Marines used flashbang grenades that blinded the Vethrak's sensitive eyes. They planted breaching charges in ventilation shafts and collapsed entire sections of the ship. They fought in 2-person teams, moving fast and low, using the ship's own structure against its defenders. They were smaller, weaker, and softer than the Vethrak, in every way, and they were winning. One Vethrak soldier, captured alive after the battle, was asked what surprised him most about fighting humans. His answer, translated roughly, was this: "They smiled. We were killing them, and they smiled. We broke their bones, and they kept crawling forward, smiling. I have fought 30 species, none of them smiled." Gorath's maw fell in 11 hours. The rest of the Vethrak fleet at Palax fell in 6 days. All 3 worlds were liberated. 12 billion civilians, most of whom had never heard of Earth, looked up at unfamiliar ships in their sky, and asked who had come to save them. Archivist Penu sat in his small cabin aboard the Chungmu, and stared at his recording equipment. His original notes, the ones that began with "the humans arrived with courage and little else," had been deleted. In their place, he wrote something new. His hands shook as he typed. They did not fight like a species trying to survive. They fought like a species that has been doing this to itself for thousands of years, and finally found someone else to aim at. I do not know whether to be grateful or afraid. I think I am both. 600 light-years away, on Aethys Prime, Speaker Voleth received the Palax Front report. He read it once, slowly. He read it again, faster. He read it a third time, and set the tablet down on his desk with hands that would not stop trembling. He contacted Ambassador Dren on a secure channel. The reptilian diplomat answered immediately, as if he had been waiting. "You have read it," Dren said. It was not a question. "What have we invited into this war?" Voleth whispered. Then he said, "Something that was already there. We just gave it permission to come out." The Palax victory should have been celebrated. 12 billion lives saved, 3 star systems reclaimed, the first real defeat the Vethrak Dominion had suffered in 12,000 years. The Grand Chamber should have been ringing with cheers and songs of gratitude. It should have been the greatest moment in the history of the Galactic Council. Instead, the Grand Chamber was silent, and the silence was the kind that comes before something breaks. Speaker Voleth had called a closed session. No aides, no translators, no records. Just the 46 species leaders sitting in their seats, with their screens dark and their doors locked. The lights in the chamber had been dimmed, and in the shadows, 46 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy listened to intelligence briefings about a small blue planet and felt their blood go cold. The numbers were the first problem. Earth had sent 140 ships to the Palax front. That was what they sent first, the way a person might send a polite note before arriving at a party. Back on Earth, the orbital shipyards were doing something that the Council's best economists said was impossible. They were building warships at a rate that doubled every 6 weeks. Factories that had been making civilian goods were now making weapons. Mines that had been closed were now open and running day and night. Civilians, millions of them, were volunteering for military service. Not because they were forced, not because they were afraid, because they wanted to. In less than 2 months, Earth's fleet had gone from 140 ships to over 400, and it was still growing. How? Warden Quillos asked from his seat. The avian commander's feathers were flat against his body, a sign of deep unease. How does a single planet produce warships at this speed? Our industrial models say it is not possible. They do not have the population. The math does not work. The Council's chief intelligence analyst, a small furry being named Rollick, pulled up a chart on the central display. The math does work, he said quietly. It works because we were using the wrong model. We were measuring them by our standards. Humans do not operate on our standards. When a human society goes to what they call a war footing, they restructure everything. Every factory, every worker, every piece of raw material. Their entire economy becomes a machine with one purpose, and that purpose is to win. They have done this before, many times, to each other. That was when Rawlik made a mistake. Or perhaps it was not a mistake. Perhaps he knew exactly what he was doing when he opened the next file. With the Council's permission, he said, I would like to share some selections from Earth's uncensored military history. He shared them. The chamber saw images of a war that humans called World War I. Millions of soldiers standing in mud, killing each other with gas and bullets and bare hands for 4 years over a few miles of ground. They saw World War II, where humans built machines of war on a scale that made the Palax fleet look like a child's toy collection. They saw the mushroom clouds over 2 cities, where humans split the atom and dropped it on their own kind. They saw the Cold War, where 2 human nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to destroy their entire planet, and then sat like that for decades, daring each other to blink. The chamber was very quiet after that. They did this to themselves? Asked the ambassador from the Pelori, a gentle herbivore species that had not fought a war in 3,000 years. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Rawlik said, multiple times. And each time they came back stronger. Their wars make them better at war. It is a cycle that, as far as we can tell, has no end. Speaker Volith felt something he had not felt since he was young and small and hiding from predators in the dark tunnels of his homeworld. He felt like prey. The closed session lasted 9 hours. By the end, 2 clear positions had formed. Ambassador Dren argued for trust. Humans have a concept they call honor, he said. They keep their promises. They bleed for strangers. We have seen this at Palax. They did not fight for themselves. They fought for 12 billion people they had never met. That is not the behavior of a predator. That is the behavior of a protector. Warden Quillos argued for containment. Protectors become conquerors when they are strong enough, he said. His sharp eyes swept the chamber. We must plan for what happens after this war. Embargoes, fleet limits, technology restrictions, quarantine of their home system if necessary. We invited a fire to burn our enemies, and now we must build a cage before it burns us. The vote on the matter was postponed. No one wanted to make a decision. No one wanted to be the one to say out loud what everyone was thinking, that the Galactic Council was now fighting a war on 2 fronts. The Vethrak Dominion stood in front of them, still dangerous, still enormous. And behind them, growing larger by the day, was a species that the galaxy had laughed at just 2 months ago, and now could not look at without flinching. Shin Yuri noticed the change. She was a diplomat. Noticing things was her entire job. She saw the way delegates moved aside when she walked down the corridors of Aethys Prime. She saw the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. She saw the way the server at the diplomatic cafeteria gave her extra food without being asked, as if afraid of what might happen if a human went hungry. She sent a private message to Admiral Dohyun. They are more afraid of us than they are of the Vethrak. This could become a problem. Dohyun's reply came back in 12 seconds. Good. Fear keeps allies honest. Let me know if it becomes something else. On the front lines, the war continued. The Vethrak had pulled back from 2 more sectors after Palax, not because the Council pushed them, but because they were moving forces to deal with the human threat. For the first time in living memory, the Vethrak were reacting to someone else's strategy instead of forcing others to react to theirs. Captain Beck Jiho and his wolves had become the most famous unit in the war. His wolfpack tactics, the fast strikes and disappearing acts in asteroid fields, had been copied by 3 other Council species with mixed results. When asked why the copies did not work as well, Jiho shrugged and said, "You have to be a little bit crazy. You cannot train that. You are born with it, or you are not." The Vethrak had given humans a name in their own language. They called them Gol Virath. The closest translation was the wound that teaches. It was not a term of hate. The Vethrak did not have a word for hate. Hate was too weak for how they felt about most things. Gol Viroth was a term of grudging, painful respect. It meant something that hurt you so badly that you became different afterward. Something that left a scar on your soul. For the first time in 12,000 years, Vethrak commanders began choosing their battles. They started avoiding engagements with human ships. When a human fleet appeared on their sensors, they would pull back and wait for it to pass, like animals giving way to a larger predator on a forest trail. Then the unthinkable happened. The Vethrak Dominion sent a diplomatic message. This by itself was remarkable. The Vethrak did not do diplomacy, they did ultimatums. But this message was different. It was polite, almost respectful, and it was not addressed to the Galactic Council. It was addressed to Earth. The Vethrak wanted to talk, not to the Council, not to the Alliance, not to the 46 species that had been fighting them for months. They wanted to talk to the humans. Only the humans. Speaker Volith learned about the message 14 hours after it was sent, from a junior intelligence officer who looked like he was about to be sick. Volith read the message 3 times. Then he sat in his chair in the dark, in the empty grand chamber, and listened to the silence. The Vethrak were afraid, not of the Council, not of the Alliance. They were afraid of humans, and they were trying to cut a separate deal to make the humans stop. The galaxy had shifted. The center of power had moved, quietly and completely, to a single blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star at the edge of the spiral arm. And Volith, old and tired and more afraid than he had ever been in his long life, whispered into the darkness a question that had no good answer. What happens when the war is over and they have nothing left to fight? The message from the Vethrak Dominion arrived on the Chungmu's communication array at 3 in the morning, ship time. Admiral Kang Do-hyun was asleep. His aide woke him, and Do-hyun read the message sitting on the edge of his bunk in a wrinkled undershirt, rubbing his eyes with one hand and holding his tablet with the other. The message was from Overlord Goth himself, the supreme commander of the Vethrak Dominion, the being who had personally ordered the destruction of more than 100 worlds. Goth had never spoken to another species as an equal. His entire career, his entire civilization, was built on the idea that the Vethrak were above all others, and that conquest was not just their right, but their nature. And yet here he was, speaking to a human admiral from a species that had only been traveling between stars for a few decades. And his tone was something that Do-hyun recognized immediately. It was the tone of a fighter who had been hit for the first time and did not like how it felt. Goth's offer was simple. The Vethrak would return all conquered Council territory. Every system, every world, every station. They would pull back to their original borders and agree to a ceasefire. In exchange, Earth would sign a mutual non-aggression pact with the Dominion. The Vethrak would not attack humans. Humans would not attack the Vethrak. The rest of the galaxy could do whatever it pleased. The Dominion did not care about the Council anymore. Goth had done the math. He could still crush the Council fleet. He could still burn their worlds. But the humans were a different equation, and no matter how many times he ran the numbers, the answer came out the same. The humans were something new, something that did not follow the old rules, and Goth, for all his brutality, was not stupid enough to ignore what had happened at Palax. Then he called a meeting. They gathered in the Chungmu's war room, the 4 people Do-hyun trusted most. Shin Yuri came by secure hologram from Aethys Prime, her image flickering slightly in the corner. Yoon Hana sat at the table with her tablet, already running numbers on what the Vethrak still had in terms of fleet strength. Captain Baek Jiho leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his uniform wrinkled, because Jiho's uniform was always wrinkled. Commander No Taesun sat like a statue, his big hands flat on the table, waiting. "Goth wants peace," Do-hyun said. "Goth wants survival," Yuri corrected. "There is a difference. He is not offering peace because he believes in it. He is offering peace because he is afraid of us. The moment he is not afraid, the offer disappears." Jiho snorted. "So we make sure he stays afraid." "That is not a long-term strategy," Yuri said. Hana looked up from her tablet. "He still has roughly 80,000 warships. We have hurt him, but we have not broken him. If we accept this deal, he keeps those ships. He keeps his empire. He keeps the 300 species he has enslaved over the last 12,000 years. He just agrees to leave us alone." The room was quiet for a moment. Taesun, who rarely spoke in meetings, broke the silence. "There are people in chains on those worlds. People who have been slaves for generations. They are not our species. They are not our allies. Most of them have never heard of Earth. But they are people." Do-hyun looked at his commander. "Is that your vote?" "That is my vote," Taesun said. Do-hyun nodded. He opened a communication channel to the Vethrak flagship and spoke directly to Overlord Gath. His voice was calm and even, the way it always was when he had already made up his mind and was simply informing the universe of the decision. "Overlord Gath, Earth acknowledges your message. We reject your offer. Our counterterms are as follows. The Vethrak Dominion will return all conquered territory. You will release every enslaved population across every species you have ever conquered, going back 12,000 years. You will submit to disarmament inspections conducted by a joint human and council commission. These terms are not open to discussion." There was a long pause. When Gath's reply came, his translator struggled with the tone. It was something between disbelief and rage. "You are one planet. You have been in space for less than a single Vethrak lifetime. You do not get to make demands of the Dominion." Do-hyun's expression did not change. "Then I will see you at Vethra Prime." The channel closed. Jiho let out a low whistle. Hana returned to her tablet. Yuri closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and said, "I will inform the council." The final campaign began 3 weeks later. Earth's fleet had grown to over 800 warships, with more arriving every week. The orbital shipyards back home were now producing 1 new destroyer every 9 days, and 1 heavy cruiser every 20. The Council's auxiliary fleet, about 300 ships under Warden Quilos's reluctant command, followed behind the human advance. Quilos had been ordered to support the humans. He obeyed, but he kept his fleet well behind the front line, close enough to observe and far enough to run. The Vethrak fought like cornered animals, because that was what they were. Goth had pulled every ship he had to the defensive lines around Dominion core space. The fortifications were massive, layers of weapons platforms and minefields, and armored stations that had been built over millennia. No fleet had ever gotten close. Do-hyun did not try to go through the fortifications. He went around them. Hana had developed a new weapon during the war. She called them gravity lances, focused beams of gravitational force that could be aimed at a specific point in space. The effect was devastating. A gravity lance hit a ship the way a fist hits a tin can. It crushed it, crumpled it, turned 2 kilometers of armored warship into a compressed ball of scrap metal in less than a second. Hana had designed them, tested them, and put them into production in 3 months. When Quilos's tactical officer asked how that was possible, Hana smiled and said, "We work fast when we are motivated." The human fleet punched through the Vethrak defensive lines at a point that Goth had considered impassable, a region of unstable space near a dying star. Human navigators flew through it anyway because the alternative was going the long way. And humans did not like going the long way. 30 ships were lost in the passage. Do-hyun added their names to a list he kept on his personal tablet. a list that grew longer every day and that he read every night before he slept. Once through, the human fleet fell on the Vethrak core systems like a storm. Hana's gravity lances tore apart defensive stations. Jiho's wolves raced ahead of the main fleet, scouting and raiding and causing chaos wherever they appeared. Taesun's marines boarded and captured a Vethrak fortress world, a place that had held against council sieges for centuries. They took it in 9 days. When the fortress commander was captured, he looked at Taesun and said through his translator, "You fight like Vethrak." Taesun shook his head. "No, Vethrak fight to conquer. We fight to free." Quillas watched it all from the rear. His tactical officer, a young avian with wide eyes, turned to him during the assault on the 4th Vethrak system and said, "Sir, the humans have fired more ordnance in the last hour than our entire fleet carries." Quillas stared at the holographic display. The human ships moved across it like bright points of light, fast and relentless, spreading through Vethrak space like water through cracks in a wall. He watched a gravity lance compress a Vethrak dreadnought, a ship twice the size of anything in the Council fleet, into a chunk of metal no bigger than a shuttle. He watched boarding pods slam into enemy stations. He watched human fighters weave through defensive fire at speeds that should have killed their pilots. "We need to make sure," Quillas said slowly, "that they never have a reason to point those weapons at us." The Dominion cracked. It broke the way a dam breaks, one crack at a time, each one bigger than the last, until the whole thing came apart. Fleet after fleet surrendered. Worlds that had been under Vethrak control for thousands of years sent signals of submission to the approaching human ships. Enslaved populations rose up against their masters when they heard that someone was coming to set them free. Someone from a planet they had never heard of. Someone who had no reason to save them except that they had decided it was the right thing to do. Overlord Gath made his final stand, above Vethra Prime, with the last 6,000 ships of his once great fleet. He fought hard. He fought without surrender. He fought the way the Vethrak had always fought, with everything they had and nothing held back. It had stopped being enough the moment a small woman in a dark suit stood up in the back of a galactic chamber and said, "Point us in the right direction." When his fleet was reduced to burning wreckage and his flagship was surrounded, Gath opened one last communication channel, not to Dohyun, not to anyone in particular. He spoke to the void, to the record, to whatever came after. "We ruled for 12,000 years. We were the strongest, we were the greatest, and we were brought down by a species that has been in space for less than a generation. Remember that, remember what they are, because if you do not, you will learn the way we did." Then Overlord Gath turned his flagship toward the nearest star and flew into it. The Dominion died with him. The war was over. The galaxy was free, and 46 species looked at the human fleet hanging in the sky above Vethra Prime and felt something complicated and contradictory and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Gratitude and terror mixed together so thoroughly that no one could tell where one ended and the other began. 6 months after the fall of the Vethrak Dominion, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened to it. Worlds were being rebuilt. Refugee fleets were returning to systems that had been burned and were now being replanted with life. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were walking free under open skies, blinking in sunlight they had never seen, speaking in languages they had kept alive in secret for generations. By every measure that mattered, the galaxy was healing, and it owed that healing to a species from a single unremarkable planet, orbiting a single unremarkable star. The Galactic Council had never been more afraid. Speaker Voleth called the most classified session in Council history. The doors to the Grand Chamber were sealed with physical locks, not electronic ones, because someone on Voleth's staff had pointed out that human hackers could open electronic locks from across the galaxy. No aides were allowed, no translators, no recording devices. 46 species leaders sat in their seats in the dim light, and Volith stood at the central podium and laid out the intelligence briefing that had been keeping him awake every night for the past 3 months. Earth's fleet now numbered over 2,000 warships. Production had not slowed since the war ended. If anything, it had become more efficient as human engineers refined their processes. At current rates, Earth would have the largest military fleet in the galaxy within 18 months. Humanity had established forward operating bases in 3 sectors, officially for peacekeeping and reconstruction. Unofficially, they gave Earth a military presence deeper inside galactic space than any single species had ever maintained. Human corporations, fast and aggressive and answering to no one but their own profit motives, had begun mining operations in unclaimed systems across the Outer Rim. The scale of their operations was staggering. Within a decade, they would control more raw resources than the next 5 species combined. And perhaps most terrifying of all, Earth's population was not tired. The war had not broken them the way wars broke other species. They did not come home shattered and withdrawn. They came home proud. They celebrated. They told stories. They built monuments. The war had made them more united, more confident, and more certain of their place in the universe than they had ever been. Recruitment for military service had not slowed. If anything, it had increased. Volith looked out over the 46 leaders. "They are not slowing down," he said. "I do not believe they know how." The debate that followed lasted 11 hours. It was bitter and frightened and ugly. Warden Quillos made his argument for containment again, louder this time, with more charts and more desperation. Fleet limits, technology embargoes, restricted travel zones around Earth. A quarantine, polite in name and absolute in practice. Build a wall around the humans before they spread so far that no wall could hold them. Others supported him. The Pelori ambassador, still haunted by the images of human nuclear weapons, argued that any species capable of using such weapons on itself could not be trusted with the power it now held. The representative from the Keth Collective pointed out that humans had developed 2 entirely new weapon systems during the war alone, and asked how many more were sitting in laboratories back on Earth, waiting. Ambassador Dren argued against them all. He stood in the center of the chamber, his reptilian eyes cold and steady, and said what no one else was willing to say. "You are making plans to contain the species that just saved your lives. You are drafting embargoes against the fleet that freed your worlds. Every person in this room is alive because of those humans, and you want to repay them with chains. You are not just ungrateful. You are foolish. If the humans ever discover that we were plotting against them while they were still burying their dead, we will deserve whatever comes next." But fear is louder than reason, and the vote went against Dren. The council drafted the Aethys Accords, a framework of laws and restrictions carefully worded to sound like a mutual peace agreement, while being, in practice, a cage. Fleet size limitations, weapons development oversight, restricted expansion zones, trade regulations designed to slow human economic growth. Every clause was written with polite diplomatic language, and every clause had teeth. They summoned Shin Yuri to the Grand Chamber to present the accords. Yuri arrived alone. She wore the same simple dark suit she had worn on the day she first volunteered Earth for the war. She walked to the center of the chamber, the same way she had walked that day, with small steps and a straight back, and an expression that gave away nothing. Voleth presented the Aethys Accords to her on a formal data tablet. He gave a short speech about unity, cooperation, and the importance of building a peaceful future together. His words were carefully chosen. His hands were steady. His voice did not shake, because he had practiced this moment for 2 days. Yuri took the tablet. She read the document. She read every word, every clause. every carefully disguised restriction. It took her 20 minutes. The chamber waited in silence while she read, and the silence grew heavier with every page she turned. When she finished, she set the tablet down on the podium. She looked at Voleth. She looked at the 46 leaders of the Galactic Council, each one watching her with eyes that held some mixture of hope and guilt and fear. Then Shin-Yuri, the small woman from the cheap seat near the exit, spoke. "You asked us to fight your war," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been. Calm, clear, final. We did not hesitate. We sent our sons and daughters to die in your skies, above your worlds, for your people. We bled in corridors of enemy ships to free civilizations we had never met. We buried our dead in the cold space between your stars, far from home, far from the soil of Earth. We did this because you asked, and because it was right. She paused. The chamber did not breathe. And now you hand us this. She touched the tablet lightly with one finger. You dress chains in the language of cooperation and present them as a gift. You ask the people who saved you to become smaller so that you can sleep easier. She shook her head. We will not sign. We will not shrink. We will not accept limits written by those who sat safely behind us while we fought and died. She looked directly at Speaker Voleth. But hear me clearly, Speaker. We are not your enemy. We never were. The difference between us and the Vethrak is simple. We could conquer you. Every world, every system, every species in this chamber. We have the ships, we have the weapons, we have the will. But we choose not to. That choice, Speaker Voleth, is the only accord you will ever need from Earth. She turned and walked out of the grand chamber. No one tried to stop her. No one spoke. The silence lasted 11 minutes. Archivist Penu, who had smuggled a small recording device into the session, inside a fold of his skin, captured every second of it. In the days that followed, the Aethys Accords were quietly shelved. No one formally withdrew them. They simply stopped being mentioned, the way people stop mentioning a terrible idea once they realize how terrible it was. Ambassador Dren became the bridge. He traveled between Aethys Prime and Earth 7 times in the following months, building something that had not existed before, a real relationship between humanity and the Council. Not one built on fear or pity or the memory of debt. One built on the slow, difficult, fragile process of learning to trust someone who could destroy you and chose not to. Admiral Kang Do-hyun ordered the fleet to stand down to peacetime status. Warships were mothballed. Soldiers went home. The orbital shipyards switched back to civilian production. Do-hyun himself retired to a small house by the sea and spent his mornings fishing and his afternoons reading the names on his tablet, the list of every person he had lost during the war. He read it every day. He would read it every day for the rest of his life. Captain Baek Ji-ho opened a noodle shop on the space station above the liberated world of Palex 3. He called it the Wolf's Den. Within 6 months, it was the most popular restaurant on the station. Aliens who had never eaten human food lined up for hours. Ji-ho cooked every bowl himself and told war stories to anyone who would listen. And his customers, no matter what species they were, always laughed at the same parts. Yoon Hana published her weapons research openly, every formula, every blueprint, every principle behind the pulse collapse warheads and the gravity lances. She did this not because she wanted others to build them, but because she wanted everyone to know what Earth could do. Deterrence, she explained to a confused council journalist, works best when there are no secrets. Commander No Tae-soon volunteered to train the first interspecies marine unit. Soldiers from 11 different species trained together under his command, learning to fight as one. They were clumsy and slow and confused at first. Tae-sun was patient with all of them. When asked why he bothered, he said, "Because the next time something like the Vethrak comes along, I do not want us to fight alone. I want us to fight together. Archivist Pennu completed his record of the war. It ran to 47 volumes. Libraries across the galaxy requested copies. Universities built entire courses around it. But it was the final entry, the last paragraph of the last volume, that was quoted most often. Schools taught it. Diplomats memorized it. It was carved into the wall of the rebuilt Grand Chamber on Aethys Prime, in letters large enough to read from every seat, including the cheap one near the exit. It read, "I have studied 10,000 species across the span of galactic history. I have catalogued empires that burned brighter than stars and faded just as fast. But I have never encountered a species like humanity. They are violent and gentle, unpredictable and loyal, sentimental and ruthless. They will shake your hand and mean it. They will fight your war and win it. And when it is done, they will sit beside you, share a meal, and ask about your children." The galaxy spent ages fearing the next great conqueror. It never occurred to us that the most dangerous species in the universe would be the one that simply wanted friends and was willing to fight a god to get them. Far away, in the rebuilt Grand Chamber of Aethys Prime, Speaker Voleth stood alone. The session had ended hours ago. The delegates had gone. The lights were dim. He stared at the holographic map of the galaxy that floated above the central podium. Millions of stars glowing softly in the dark. Trade routes and alliance lines crisscrossed the map like threads of light. And there, at the edge of the spiral arm, glowing no brighter than any other dot, was Earth. One planet, one species, one small blue world that had been laughed at in this very chamber less than a year ago. Voleth shook his head slowly. His old shell creaked. His 4 hands hung at his sides. And in the quiet of the empty chamber, he spoke to no one but himself and the stars. One planet. They did all of that with one planet. He stared at the small blue dot for a long time. Then he turned off the map and walked home in the dark.